Good morning. Thank you. I'm really not sure how I merited this privilege, and I mean that sincerely, of talking to you. I'm just a lonely Franciscan living in the deserts of New Mexico, but somehow through some circuitous route, I got invited to share with you a few remarks. I tried to think, why did they think I would have anything to say to you here on the East Coast, getting an education that I never got. I got a different kind. And one reason that came to mind is that for about 5 years, starting in the early 90s, I began to research everything I could on the universal phenomenon of initiation rites. For 5 years, I read cross-culturally Africa, Australia, Celtic Europe, the Native Americans, and it seems it was universally accepted till recent history that young people didn't naturally become wise, that they had to be guided, they had to be taught, they had to be carefully taught, as Rogers and Hammerstein would perhaps say. And we are very much a culturally, ritually starved culture, except for Catholic masses and graduation ceremonies and 4th of July parades. Really, the American people are not that comfortable with rites of passage. We almost have lost the art. So I started and created a 5-day event. We started in 1996 giving these 5-day events at that point largely for young men, because they, in general, needed it more than young women for a whole bunch of reasons. And now it's spread to, I think, 15 regions of North America, 9 countries. And it amazes me, really it does, why did this happen? How did this happen? Why did people see this need to grow people up? And to grow people up when culture and spirituality and what I would call theology all worked as one. It wasn't as divided up as the world we live in now. Maybe some of you are most familiar among the many people I studied was Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero's Journey. And he charted cross-culturally, reading the different fairy tales and mythologies and legends and scriptures of the world religions, and he said there was a classic path. And this has been roundly agreed upon by many different people. There might be variations in the path, but in general, the first half of life, and not that it can ever be divided into two neat parts, but the first half of life is what some later called your survival dance. Now that's, I presume, what Georgian court has given you, the skills to do your survival dance. In my book, Falling Upward, I call it finding the container, your method of operating in the world. And that's probably what you've done here, I hope so. And from what I hear about this place, they seem to do a very good job of it. But don't confuse yet your survival dance with your sacred dance. Now, what the great hero's journey says is there's a transitional event that catapults you from your survival dance to your sacred dance. And to be quite honest, in a secular society, a lot of people never make the transition because, I'm going to have to say it, it has something to do with suffering. Damn it, I had to say it. Somehow, the salvation project you've created for yourself, as Thomas Merton calls it, and school should be your container, should be your salvation project, but you'll find somewhere in the middle of the journey, and this has to happen, it must happen. In fact, before this state, you're called an innocent. I don't know, do they still teach Latin? Innocent means not wounded, not wounded. So before, you're an innocent, but you have to be wounded. Somehow, the beautiful way you've constructed life has to in some way disappoint you. Now, I'm telling you that ahead of time, so when it happens, you won't be disappointed. And you won't think, why did this happen to me? Am I the only person who life fell apart for in this way or another? No, join the human race. This is the pattern. This is the way it happens. Even the Buddha said, it's part of the deal. It's part of the deal of living that somehow our game has to disappoint us. So I tell you that ahead of time, so you won't waste most of your life trying to defend yourself from what Carl Jung calls necessary suffering. Necessary suffering. Otherwise, we live with a highly inflated ego, thinking we're far more important than we really are. But if, by the grace of God, we can transition from our survival dance to our sacred dance, we find not just the container, but what I would call the contents. What was the container meant to hold? Now that should have been, and still is, the supreme work of the church, the work of the soul. To awaken the soul to its deepest meaning, its deepest purpose. And that, of course, is the hope of this dear faculty and these trustees and this board, that you won't just stop here, but you will, by the grace of God, find your sacred dance. What were you created for? Who are you, as St. Paul would say, hidden with Christ in God? We call it your true self. I'm in my 75th year, and I'm still discovering it. Who am I underneath all of the window dressing, all of the costumes and caps and identities that I have too, just like you do? But somewhere along the path, you learn to take them less seriously. You learn to know that they are just window dressing. They're what Thomas Merton would call the false self. You need them. They're the raw material of finding your true self, but they're not yet the thing in itself. That's the work of God. It's not something you really discover. By and large, it's something you fall into. That's why I entitled the book, Falling Upward. When I wrote the book, I said, there must have been 10 books with that title. It's so clearly what we Catholics would call the Paschal Mystery, that you rise by dying. In fact, you have to die to rise, that they're two sides of one coin. But the publisher looked it up, and he couldn't find any other book with that title except a children's book. Maybe some of you know it, Shel Silverstein, but there was an S on the end of it, Falling Upwards. So we took the S off, and I got the title. That's the wisdom of the great world religions, that you have to go down to go up. I'm sorry to have to tell you that. And I want to end, because I don't want to bore you with too many words. You've heard too many sermons in your life, I'm sure. We use poetry a lot in teaching in our living school, teaching people the contemplative mind. And one of my favorite is one from the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke. I'm sure some of the faculty or even students are familiar with it. And it's called How Surely Gravity's Law. How surely gravity's law. They say it's much better in the German. You'll have to endure the English. How surely gravity's law, strong as an ocean current, it takes hold of even the smallest thing and pulls it toward the heart of the world. Each thing, each stone, blossom, child, is held in place. Only we in our arrogance push out beyond what we each belong to for some empty freedom. If we but surrendered to Earth's intelligence, this is very Franciscan, by the way. I'm a follower of the man who granted brotherhood and sisterhood to everything. Brother sun, sister moon, Sister Fox, Brother Dog. It was all a subjective relational universe. If we but surrendered to Earth's intelligence, we could rise up, rooted like trees. Instead, we entangle ourselves in knots largely of our own making, and we struggle lonely and confused. Who of us has not been there? So like children, we begin again and again to learn from the things. I just put my black lab to sleep after 15 years a few weeks ago. And, I learned about real presence as a Catholic in theology manuals. But you know who really taught me real presence? My black lab. Ooh. So like children, we begin again to learn from the things, because they are already in God's heart. They have never left him. This is what the things, nature, the animal world, the real world that's all around us that we far too much take for granted. This is what the things can teach us: to fall patiently, and to trust our heaviness. Even a bird has to do this before he can fly. Thank you. Thank you.